It's time to start the second symposium on role of development sector in nutritional well-being. I respectfully invite the following dignitaries to the head table. Session Chair, Mrs. R.P.M. Sadamali, Joint Secretary of the Nutrition Society of Sri Lanka. The speakers, Dr. Lakmini Magoraratne, Ms. Visakha Tilakaratne, and Mrs. Dilga Pires. Dr. Lakmini Magoraratne will be joining with us online. The participants are kindly requested to post their questions via the chat and they will be discussed in the panel discussion. Over to you, madam, to proceed with the symposium.
We have three eminent speakers who are champion in the development sector to talk about role of development sector in the nutritional well-being. Dr. Lakmini Magodaratna, Ms. Vishaka Tilakaratna, and Ms. Dilka Freeris. Dr. Lakmini Magodaratna, she will be joining with us online, and Ms. Dilka and Ms. Vishaka, they are here with us physically. First speaker. Yeah, our final lecture is by Dr. Lakmini Magodaratna about shared vision in policy making for a better nutrition. Let me give a brief bio about Dr. Lakmini. She is a consultant committee petition attached to the Ministry of Health, now serving as the acting director at Nutrition Division of Ministry of Health. She has 2 postgraduate degrees in public health, a master degree, a doctorate in community medicine, and a postgraduate certificate in medical education awarded by the Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, University of Colombo. She has served nearly 22 years so far in the government services and has years of experience in planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation in all areas of public health. With her academic background and experience gained over the years working at different levels of healthcare system in Sri Lanka, she continues her services as a program manager, public health expert, and supervisor for masters and MD trainees in community medicine. Dr. Lakmini, floor is over to you now.
Shared vision in policy making for better nutrition. I'm Dr. Lakmini Magodaratna, Consultant Committee Vision, Direct Acting, Nutrition Division, Ministry of Health. To know, nutrition is the maker and marker of development. And we know that the foundation to sustainable development goal, nutrition address, SDG 2, SDG 3, directly address nutrition. And we know to improve nutritional status, it is essential that food and nutrition security are ensured. But hunger and poverty are key constraints to achieve food and nutrition security. The current COVID-19 pandemic has created food security issues across the globe and in Sri Lanka as well, and call for urgent interventions from all responsible parties. Why I said from all responsible parties? Because optimal nutritional status for every citizen in any country is only achieved through multi-sectoral action that are not limited to health system. Why I say so? Let's consider determinants of malnutrition. As you know, there are immediate causes and there are underlying causes. Food and nutrient intake and health status of a particular individual are the immediate causes. And when you consider underlying causes, which are embedded in household and community level, we can consider agricultural practices, climate change, lack of access to and availability of clean water and sanitation, health services, girls' education and gender issues, and social protection and social safety nets. So you can see that health services are not the one and only underlying cause, but one of the underlying cause. So, if so, achieving optimal nutrition status for every citizen should be a policy priority for all those stakeholders who are responsible for those underlying causes I mentioned before. So, better nutrition should be a major focus in those respective policies in all relevant stakeholders. We all need to share the vision for good nutrition, growth and development. Without thinking along sector-specific silos, we have to create a shared policy platform and program designers, planners and implementers must work together in a harmonized approach to identify strategies and activities to implement. Let's see who should be sharing policies and strategies that they can plan and implement. Let's take Ministry of Health. The health sector is the best placed sector, as you know, to deliver most of the nutrition interventions. So, Ministry of Health is responsible for the stewardship, advocacy, and regulatory function regarding these shared vision policies. Apart from that, Ministry of Health is responsible to develop and implement nutrition-friendly policies to advocate for increased access to and availability of health services and provide good health services for all people of all ages, including screening, treatment, or referral for malnutrition. Not only that, they have to identify and address barriers to women and adolescents accessing health services and address gender barriers to adapting and sustaining optimal caring practices, and also to promote or model those optimal caring practices. If we want to share vision, we should be not stingy to share information. Otherwise, we can't definitely go for a harmonized approach. So everybody, all stakeholders should collect, analyze, and share the information relevant. When we consider Ministry of Health, they should have information on health and nutritional status of each and every person who are residing in that particular area or country. Let's go for another stakeholder, one major one. We know Ministry of Agriculture. We know the importance of leveraging agriculture to improve nutrition, and there is no doubt about the importance of nutrition being explicitly considered and progress being measured is the very important factor if we want to achieve better nutrition. So the Ministry of Agriculture should be producing nutrient-dense food and nutrient-rich crop production techniques, and they have to promote good agricultural practice, and they have to promote better use and conservation of soil and water. In Sri Lankan context, the other one, very important factor that they should think about in their policies are promoting linkages between farmers and markets to increase availability and affordability of nutrient-dense food to obtain the best sale price. And they have to have a system to track food production, prices, and early warning signs of drought and famine. If they don't have such a system, they have to establish. If they have a system, they have to maintain and promote it. As I told you before, we have to share information. So the Ministry of Agriculture should have information on consumption, production, weather, prices of inputs, supplies, and produce. They have to collect, analyze, and share. Let's go for another stakeholder, that is Ministry of Environment. We know we have to have the most appropriate and positive decision to ensure clean environment. And they are very responsible to develop and implement wash-friendly policies in all settings. That is including community, school, health facilities, and workplaces. And they have to advocate wash facilities such as toilets, hand washing station, water storage, and health facilities, workplaces, which is very important in this COVID-19 situation. And they also have to provide or maintain wash facilities in all settings and promote wash practices, including the use of wash facilities and products, and promote the use of moderate quantities of pesticide and fertilizers, both organic and inorganic, which is very important in Sri Lanka because we have to deal with CKDU, that is chronic disease of the unknown. We assume that there is a link between pesticide and fertilizers and the CKDU. So we have to use them within safe distances from drinking water sources. As we consider information regarding Ministry of Environment, they should have information on water, sanitation, and the environment. Again, I am stressing the fact they have to share the information. Ministry of Finance is one of the major stakeholders. We can't do anything without finance. So they have to have skills in budgeting and budget tracking to make and act on the most appropriate and positive decisions regarding how income is saved and used for food, used for caring practices, health, to achieve a clean environment and education. And they have to provide low-cost loans, particularly to women, And they have to identify and address gender barriers, if there are any, to household resources or income. And they have to promote income generating activities. Ministry of Finance should promote market access to help producers, processors, and retailers to sell their products and generate income that can be invested in better health, better care, and food consumption. The dynamics of resource allocation are also very important to understand and incorporate when you design finance policies. They may have to administer conditional cash transfers and other social support programs targeting households that are nutritionally vulnerable. When we consider Sri Lanka, Samurdhi or any cash transferring program should consider nutrition as one of their criteria. Let's consider one other major stakeholder, that is the Ministry of Women and Child Affairs. As you know, in Sri Lanka, we don't have much gender bias, but we have to promote and adhere gender-friendly policies that prioritize women's empowerment. Not only women's empowerment, men's engagement in nutrition, growth and development. And we have to identify if there's any and address gender barriers. And very importantly, the minister should keep steps and keep adolescents and girls, women in school. And they have to advocate women's control of resources and role in decision making, which is very important. For that, they have to build women's confidence to make decisions and manage household resources. They have to target women in income generation intervention, including but not limited to agriculture and livestock rearing. I think we can take an example, the Thailand. Thailand is a country where they use women for income generation in tourism, in agriculture, in hotel industry, and all those industries, they generate so much income compatible with men as well. So in Sri Lanka, I think Ministry of Women and Child Affairs has a long way to go. And Ministry of Education. Let's see Ministry of Education. This is the ministry is more responsible to impart knowledge and promote skills to make and act on the most appropriate and positive decisions related to nutrition, growth and development. They should focus nutrition in their curricula and extracurricular activities. As you know, when ordinary level examination, nutrition health is included in, nutrition is included in the health subject. So the health should not be a basket subject, but a comparative, mandatory subject. So all the children would know about nutrition and the ingredient for good nutrition. That's a very important policy area that the Ministry of Education should focus on. And they also should take steps to keep adolescent girls and women in school. I am considering for both formal and non-formal education here, because as you know, when women are literate, female literacy plays a big role in decision making and managing household resources and also caring practices. So keeping all our girls and women in school, and not only school, undergraduate, postgraduate, there should be a focus in nutrition for all those streams and courses. So all these major stakeholders has to share their policies and they have to think multi-sectorally. We have to think multi-sectorally, and we have to share a model of program delivery which should be sustainable and which should be robust enough to act synergistically to achieve better nutrition for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lakmini, for your fruitful discussion about shared vision in policy making for better nutrition. Now we move into a second symposium lecture about community empowerment, which is more common terminology in development sector. We have a right person to talk about community empowerment. Are we on right track? It's Vishaka Tilakaratna. Let me briefly introduce about Vishaka. Vishaka obtained her special degree in chemistry from Royal Society for Chemistry and completed her master's in food technology in developing countries from King's College, University of London. Vishaka was a former council member of NSSL and also past president of NSSL. With 20 years of experience, she is working in the government, private sector, NGOs, and the United Nations. Her major area of expertise in the community development and has extensive hands of experience in regional development and poverty alleviation programs with a strong concentration on livelihood improvements. Further, she's skilled in policy development, research, donor relations, partnership building, communication for change, capacity building, and managing programs for design and to post evaluation. She holds honorary positions in several organizations such as Chief Commissioner Sri Lanka Girl Guide Association, Board Member AIDS Foundation of Sri Lanka, and so on. Vishaka, floor is over to you.
Good morning to you. I think it's still morning. And at the end of this, since I'm going to speak about a subject that really we have no control over sometimes, and it's very difficult to measure. It's very abstract, but I hope that with sufficient empowerment, that our audience will ask, if you are sufficiently empowered, at least 3 good questions at the end of this session. So, let me just get on to the presentation. The slides, is it going to be? Yeah, okay. I'm very thankful to Roshan Dalabandara, who is very much one of us, for cutting and polishing this presentation, and you will see some beautiful, background, very appropriate material that shows, I mean, these are frescoes from our history. And I think if you look at this picture, you will recognize that we are still seeing some of these features. For one, you can see a woman standing, or royalty standing and serving, and the man is seated. Then you have the devil dancer, or the soothsayer, or the Guru Nanse. We are still very much, believing in myths. Tama mantara gurukam, lokota thira. And you will see other, royal figures. So though we are not officially a monarchy, you will see that certain features of a monarchy are still with us as we go along in this. So it's a very difficult question, but a very challenging question. Thank you, Professor Chandima, our president, and the council for giving this topic. I think it's a very interesting one, but a very challenging one, and very difficult to give an answer. So let us proceed. The next slide. Okay. Now, do we see a beginning or end of empowerment? Now, this is the key question. Can we really plot how a person, an institution, or a community begins to be empowered? And can we measure concretely where that empowerment is? There are few indicators, but it's extremely difficult to measure, because empowerment, you will see later on in the definitions, it is very contextual, according to the community, according to the country, and so on. So I have made a kind of simplified presentation to a very difficult subject. Slides 2 to 9 give definitions, and also there are many definitions. It's very difficult to choose. So the framework are these definitions and processes, and then we have about 8 or 9 slides where Sri Lanka is in relation to those definitions. And I have chosen to take some of the definitions which are related to health promotion. We are very prescriptive. We love to have the teacher at the desk and the children in theater style. Or, I mean, many of you are medical doctors. I don't say everyone is like that, but it's a very prescriptive approach that we are still using in Sri Lanka. Hardly does a patient get a chance to be given an explanation as to why they are ill, how they are ill, what is affordable, especially in the private sector. You don't really give options. People are very reluctant about prescribing generic still. Patients are subservient and very scared to ask questions. Students are very scared to ask questions. We see that in the lecture room, in the classroom as well. So health promotion is a very important concept because it actually engages the patient and the community on a journey, an equal partnership. So I have taken a certain definition from, you will see later on, from a guru, an expert on health promotion who has worked around the world. And you will see that community empowerment is a process of renegotiating power. Very often powerless, and the powerless are very often poor. The powerless are educated, of course, in a conventional sense, but not maybe functionally literate. So it's very, very difficult to renegotiate power. But the end of community, or the envisaged end, we will never see the end, as I said, we'll see a renegotiation of a balance of power. So power is a central concept to community empowerment. Who has the power? And health promotion is stuck, or rather has to be dynamic, to move around in that empowerment space. As I said, when the doctor sees you, especially in a channel consultation, you have to ask, why am I having this condition? Even to that extent. What are my options? What is the cost of the option? And do we have an equal playing field? Do we look at least eye-to-eye contact if we are equal? So, health promotion will never get on to be an active journey of the people themselves unless, very importantly, this topic is addressed. Community. So I have taken one definition from health promotion and one definition from the guru of participatory development, who is Robert Chambers. In fact, he has come to Sri Lanka 3 times, and he has given the world the methodology, the concept, the thoughts on engaging people. People have to be engaged. You cannot be a passive participant. And that is disempowerment. So, what really is community empowerment? And I have said here, these 2 big circles you will see, a reasonable definition. Because you cannot really define totally. So, when you say community plus empowerment, I will just read off the presentation. Communities are groups of people that may or may not be spatially connected, but who share common interests, concerns, or identities. They could be local, national, or international, with specific or broad interests. I don't know how many of you have again seen the activism group of ours that has millions of members across the world. And a small group actually runs it on social media, and they also have physical campaigns, and they have changed the life course of many, many countries. Lobbied, millions have lobbied the presidents, prime ministers of those countries. Now that is an international community of lobbyists. And empowerment refers to the process by which people, very importantly, please remember this, because many of you have a lot to do and will have a lot to do, even students, with people, which people gain control over the factors and decisions that shape their lives. Gain control. It is not the herd mentality, where when you tell that you have to jump, you jump. That is mobilization. Mobilization is one of the first steps to empowerment. Now you cannot see the 2 circles at the corner here. The first step to empowerment is to mobilize. That is, you get people to move from the position they are in to another position, to move, to start, to think. And then you have actions to mobilize and to empower. So the 3rd step really is empowerment. And the 4th step, which we don't see in Sri Lanka, except for 25 people standing at Lipton Circus most of the time. You don't see farmers out. You don't see people seated outside parliament. Like Thailand, millions outside the parliament. I'm very happy that Dr. Lakmini took the example of Thailand to change their, country's life course. Bangladesh, another very good example of NGOs practically running public health because few years ago the government was really not having the resources. Now Bangladesh is one of the fastest developing countries. In fact, Jeffrey Sachs, the guru of the Millennium Development Goals and economic advisor to the UN, said that people had considered Bangladesh a basket case, but it has jumped on the development ladder fastest, and it's one of the fastest growing nations. And you will see many Bengalis and Bangladeshis heading UN institutions, international NGOs, because they are so mobilized and they have taken matters into their hands. And now the government is really strengthening itself through that. So the fourth would be activism, and the fifth step I have not shown. Again, this is not talking about politics, green or blue. It's about political participation, political decision making. It's not important really at this juncture for me to say who should be there or not there. But what is your political life? How much do you question the manifestos put forward by any party? How much are you there? Where is the power of recall? If a politician doesn't perform, in the UK for instance, the community is so empowered and the structures are there that you recall your politician. If he's not performing, you have the power of recall officially, constitutionally, to call back, to say, look, you're not doing well, so you better get your act together or you will not be given your home nomination. In those countries, nomination is purely not by the political party. People have to nominate. That's the first step of election, actually. So, community empowerment, you can see, is a whole series that goes up to the most important decisions if you are empowered. I spoke about Robert Chambers. He is the guru, as we said, of participatory planning. And what has he said? The poor should be taken into account when the development problem is identified, policy formulated, and projects implemented. With me here, I have many experts in development, people, long-standing players. Sandamal is there, Dilka is there. I am here, and I think some of you have deliberated on development. How many community members do we see in government, for instance, government and United Nations, or government and NGO steering committees? How much have we involved the community in multi-sector action planning? There was a very good discourse, I think, by Dr. Lakmini on shared vision. Where is the shared vision of the people? I myself have been on many steering committees on partnership, and we have struggled to ask where is the community. Farmer Banda should say what kind of water irrigation system he wants, where his pipeline should be fixed. What are the options for cropping? Cropping patterns. How much are we talking? I think Agriculture Ministry is fairly on track, with extension services, but extension services are one extension officer for 600 square kilometers in Vellavaya. How do you engage with the community to ask them what they need, right? So this is what Robert Chambers basically put very briefly, putting the last first. And if you are interested, there are many very good publications. Now we have studied this during the course of our postgraduate work, putting the farmer first, putting the last first, going back to the farmers, talking to them, learning from them, combining our knowledge on an equal platform, and then with a blended hybrid program you go forward. And farmers are not going to accept anything that is just given. They will always have their own trial anyway, right? The now generally accepted need for development professionals to be critically self-aware. We have to criticize ourselves. This underpins the concept of respecting each other. You respect the patient, you respect the child, you respect the farmer, and you're only a small player. And I myself, if somebody asks me, what are you doing? I say, I feel very much ashamed. I may be called a development professional, but if I have not changed the bottom line substantially for people to take control of their lives, I don't think I'm any good. So I'm just a development worker. I just want to, place that before you, because we cannot take any pride until we see that level of empowerment. So finally, with many different things that we do to empower, different aspects, more than the involvement, participation, or engagement of communities, it implies community ownership. I want to stress this. an action that explicitly aims at social and political change. Where was this said? At the 7th World Conference on Health in 1986, actually the 7th World Conference on Health Promotion. Mobilization is the first step towards empowerment, but not always of the people's own will. Mobilization can mean many things. You can get the military on the street and you can get people out of their houses and get them to march. That is also mobilization. But if people are convinced that they should be mobilized, that's the first step of empowerment. But doesn't mean that you are empowered, right? And what are the aspects of empowerment? Social, gender empowerment. I'm again very happy that Dr. Lakmini mentioned that we have no gender biases. I think, Dr. Lakmini, please forgive me, I think we have many gender biases. And Sri Lanka is very poorly placed on the gender empowerment scale. Gender and development, yes. More girls are in school. Renuka is nodding his head. I think, Renuka, you have more females as your students. I'm sure, Chandima, you also see this, right? But I had a very interesting chat with Dr. Deepika Udugama. In the law faculty, I asked her, Madam, how many of your girls are really, do you think, are empowered? She said, I have 70 to 80% females who are students. But after 5 o'clock, if you ask them to come for an extracurricular activity, the boys are leading, the 20% boys. Now, it's not the fault of the boy or the girl. It is our structure. How do we really have the theory of change, of empowerment? How is Sri Lanka number 55 on the gender empowerment? All the indicators, all the indices, if you club them together and average out, we are number 55 out of 180 countries. But we are very proud to say that we had a prime minister, first prime minister, and the president. But our farm women do not even recognize a weeding machine. Our farm women, only 10% have gone for training for 3 years to the Farm Mechanization Training Center. And that is in place of their husbands. Because the husbands couldn't come, the extension officer had to fill the vehicle, so he took the females. Females come back and say, look, we would like to do, but there are no resources. Only 33% of land, owned land. There is a lot of state land, but owned land, only 33% is owned by females. And when you look at the acreage and access to minor irrigation schemes, major irrigation schemes, from major irrigation, only 5% women have access to major irrigation, officially, to attend the farm organization, Kanna Raswima, etc., etc. Right? Then political. Provide the opportunity and the representation of the poor to influence policy-making processes. Now, I'm not going to comment about this. It's up to you. And make policy, right? So, where are we on this? A fully empowered community should be empowered in all this and more. There are other aspects as well, right? Levels of empowerment, you have the individual, organizations. How powerful are the secretaries of ministries today to make their own decisions? How powerful are they? How much do they take that position into their hands? We know a government agent has the powers of additional secretary of all ministries. He can enact many actions on the ground at once. How much do we see them exercising without saying, api kagen hari, I'm not going to mention who the kagen hari is, kagen hari api ahala balanna one before taking the decision. How much power does the agriculture extension officer have to influence with the farmers the cropping pattern, as I mentioned earlier? Or are women always left in the home garden? Divisional officers of agrarian services centers, Govijana Kendra, has spoken to me and said, දැන් අපි ඔය මොනවා ගැන කතා කරුවත් කාන්තාවට ඉතින් ගෙවත්ත කරන්න පුළුවන් මේ කාන්තාව කියන්නේ. Females. Never see the female in macro agriculture, paddy, large tonnage of crops, never see them. But I must say our people, whatever it is, the basic goodness is there. When you talk to them, when you make them aware, they are fully on board to give technical expertise to both genders, to allocate resources, they are there. It's only that the structural changes have still not come, right? So community empowerment finally is the change theory in the individual, institutions, organizations, local government. Everyone has to change their mind. finally to be really empowered at the national level. So this is the framework. Now this Glenn Laverack, whom I have taken the definition from his, he, as I said, has worked around the world. He was a coordinator for empowerment with the World Health Organization, and he has worked in a record number of continents. So very, very conversant about community empowerment in different contexts. And these are only some of the major steps in empowerment. This is the framework for empowerment. You have to have leaders emerging, of course, naturally, but it's better if they naturally emerge. But before they emerge, there is a process. Problem assessment capacities, analytical capacities. How much analytical capacity is there around us? Now that's a good question. You have to be able to assess the problem. What is it that we can do? What is it that they can do? What is it that we can do together? What is the weightage of the problem? How do you prioritize? That is the problem assessment capacity. With the community leadership, you have also got the local. Community can mean at many levels. Then you must have good capacity in resource mobilization. How much can a mothers group, for instance, you must be aware that there are mothers groups in villages. They are either mothers of the under 5 children, the grandmothers, adolescents. There's a whole group to support the health sector. They emerge. How much does a mothers group identify as problems or issues for the health sector to take up at different levels? Or is the mothers group there to sweep the clinic area, put the child on the scale or give the child, take the note where the weight is measured to enter into the book by the midwife? But how is it that you see? Now these are things that you should observe, right? So the resource mobilization should be where the mothers get together and say, look, 5 households in this village lack A, B or C, and can the other authorities, we spoke about the multi-sector approach, can you come into this household and help these 5 households, which we know, you may not know, but we are every day in the village. They have their own program sometimes. They will go and feed those households. They will go and help the young mothers. But how much leverage do they have? That is part of empowerment. And organizational structures and links. How much have we got our village groups to do their own proposal to a donor agency? But we are the middlemen. So we are all earning money, resources, let's be very honest. Big program budgets. Sometimes only 25% will go to the community. 75% has fallen on the way to do research, to pay salaries. All of us have benefited. But how much? So what is the direct linkage to say this is what we want, right? I mean, time is limited, but I can go on. There are so many interesting examples. So critical consciousness. Is it there amongst officials, service providers, or the people? And here, of course, I have been a judge and gone ahead and said, lacking in Sri Lanka. Then community control over program management. What we said earlier. How much is the community there in the design, in the resource allocation? Where is the community monitoring and evaluation to say, look, this happened properly or it didn't happen? Do we see? Then equitable relationships with outside agents, which I explained as donors. Now, I worked in an organization, the Dambadeniya Development Foundation. Many, many decades ago in my life, I started in development. The Germans used to buy the baskets woven by the Dambadeniya women, the Alawa women. And the German fair trade shops used to buy the basket and the tea from stations, and they used to pack the tea. And these shops are called fair trade, world shops. And once a year, the German ladies come to Sri Lanka. They sit on a mat with the Dambadeniya women, with an interpreter, and they negotiate the price. Now, that is an equal platform. But we see very few examples like that. And with the Sri Lanka in relation to definitions and processes. This is really now the slide where we start to compare. Perhaps the presentation can be shared, so I don't want to go word for word on this. But I have cited a few programs, starting from the Janasavya Trust Fund to Samurdhi and Divinagum, of course, which took over, the elements of both these programs. And Gamidiriya, the first program that I have cited, Gamidiriya, Actually, the evaluation looked quite good. But Gamidiriya was only in 54 DS divisions. That is where community-based organizations were formed, and they actually made the decisions on how to allocate, what to allocate, where to allocate resources, and it was a loan facility from the World Bank, 68 million on the first phase, but then it expanded, but suddenly it closed down. Again, where is the voice of the community if it was empowered to say, no, we need to keep this? And long before that was Jana Savya in the 80s, beginning of 90s. And Jana Savya Trust Fund had elements of bottoms up. That is really the empowerment. From the bottom, people really say what they want. They had elements of bottoms up. Samurdhi was a kind of a combination. And then, after Jana Savya Samurdhi, 1.2 million families. Now I want to ask you all a little bit of mathematics. Today, the poverty rate in Sri Lanka is 6%. But we have 1.2 million families. That translates to 5 million people. We have 21 million. So why are we giving Samurdhi to 25% of the population if our poverty rate is only 5% or 6%? Now where are we as citizens on this? So to give you the answer, are we on the right track? There are some endeavors, some approaches, some trials, some projects, but it has not gone across society. That is the issue. It is fairly contained in numbers, etc., etc. Now somebody can challenge and question. Poverty was 25% 20 years ago. Today is only 6%. And it may be so, because we see a lot more vehicles, the indicators, economic indicators, the way people dress, the way they earn, their households, all that. But in reality, if you go into the kitchen of these people that have a vehicle outside, how are they eating? Now that may be a behavior problem. But in reality, how many of the vehicles are owned totally? How many are leased? Credit card repayments. If you look at, everyone has a credit card now. Even 10,000 rupee, limit. But in reality, what are they buying from that? So we really have to look at poverty in real terms. Service poverty, purchase poverty, purchasing which goods, So there have been really serious attempts of different governments. But what about scale up? At the end of the day, people should have a political life to take major changes, to make major changes and to take major decisions. So has it translated to that level? And with the Sri Lanka in relation to definitions and processes goes on, I am part of an organization called MONLA, Movement for National Land and Agriculture Reform. It's a fantastic, organization. It was started against, overt capitalism and to give back people's land rights and agricultural rights. Basically, it's a food security and a food sovereignty, movement. Now we have formed people's participatory forums in 8 provinces, not Western province. But still, it's not the forum that identifies the environmental issues, for instance, most of the time. It's Manla, centrally here in Colombo, that identifies, does their research, and if it's a problem of Umaoya, the Uva province is, they are made to kind of activate. But the generic issue of that province should be brought up by the people. So we are still not at that level, and we have made our comments to change this. Then, mother support groups. I cited that earlier. Office bearers are very often appointed by the public health midwives. Oya and me Kumari oya and oya hondai sabapati wende. Jana hamuak tila jana hamueng neme godakalata emerge wende. That is the empowerment is, people should say we'll gather. We want a good president, secretary, treasurer of the mothers group. Let's have an agenda, and the agenda has to be powerful to make the officials work correctly and so on. But is that there? That's a question. But Health Promotion Bureau is trying to correct that, and they have done a lot of things. So we hope the evaluation will be good, right? So according to Leverak, this guy who has done so much work on community empowerment and health promotion, leaders such as religious village school principals, teachers, retired professionals, we have Dayaka Sabha in the temple. So we have a lot of community and local leadership. Leaders in produce organized like Palmyra or dairy or whatever. We have few women leaders of but we have very few women who are leaders of mixed organizations. Going back to gender empowerment. Maranadhara Samiti එක වෙලාවකට fine කරනවා ගෑනු කෙනෙක් කතා කරුවොත් 500 rupees දඩේ. I have done this research, so I'm talking to you based on that. Farm organization, Kettala Raswima. A woman goes only if the husband is sick or dead most of the time, right? So in a mixed farm organization, because women were getting cornered, Duminda Disanayaka, very good decision he took, but unknowingly, he said we will form women farmers organizations officially. Sitamu Sangvidana, Sinhala Tamil Muslim, very good concept. But what happened? He separated the women and the men. So the women will never be able to negotiate in a mixed organization because it has made them to go into the comfort zone. And the men will not get used to working with women. So very well intentioned, but a very bad move, right? In Laverack's problem assessment analysis capacity, I want to ask this. Have a traditional way of work, right? We have a very traditional way of work, so analysis capacity doesn't come out. Under heavy state bureaucratic control, because we imagine the rural development societies and the women rural development societies are supervised by the rural development officer of the divisional secretariat, right? Are driven by state resources sometimes. Women not entertained, as I said, are single objective focused. We are Govitana Vitarai. Saukyanang Saukya Vitarai. So it's all very subject specific, but not total development oriented organizations, especially at the grassroots. Culturally, ethnically, and religiously polarized. Sorry to say. We have the Pansale Dayaka Sabha. What about a religious organization of Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, all together? We don't see the religious organization. So we are very polarized. We never get used to working together. Are heavily personality oriented and controlled at every sphere. Is the powerful person in the village who is a member, or the woman member of 8 different organizations. Same people. So there is no spread. And are not, I emphasize, not activist oriented. Look at the Black Lives Matter movement. It festered for a long time, but it went across. And how powerful today. The movement is so powerful that white people are convinced to be part of Black Lives Matter, right? Resource mobilization. Traditional community-based organizations or societies are pretty good at mastering funds through traditional but robust means. Yes, Maranadhara Samiti have a lot of money, but on the membership contribution. Not creative means. We even find our own nutrition society. For a long time, we were very conventional. And now we have gone a little bit out, but still, we are quite conventional. However, small organizations very often lack the capacity to write good project proposals, for instance, to get high value funding. And very few are out of the box. Ability to ask why, critical consciousness, which comes through analytical thinking. No mass contribution to important areas of public life. This is Laverack's, other indicator, the list that I showed you. Education system, we would say, and a lot is written about this, is in paralysis. I'm not talking about higher education alone, but how many are child-friendly schools to begin with? How many preschools are child-friendly? Where the desk is in a corner and the children are made to deliberate in the center, to be the key players. So we have a system that is breeding parrots and non-critical thinkers. Medical negligence, rarely checked. No lawyer wants to take on a medical negligence case because it's a problem. They are not used to it. People don't make them to practice because people are not taking the steps that they have been dealt with negligently. That is a sign of a disempowered society, right? National budgets not questioned by the community. I'm not talking about politicians. Nor critiqued. Politicians and public officials not held accountable. And I very interestingly attended a lecture on the right to information, a presentation 2 days ago, where they have tested the right to information usage and response of state sector authorities. And only 25% have given some sort of answer on requests for right to information. Right to information demand is a key indicator of an empowered society. And so we can go on. Organizations, as I said, like mother support groups are merely service providers. The more rich, the affluent, are engaged in their own affairs and do not act as part of a community. Example, how many rich families take their children to the Game clinic or the municipal clinic? So they are not part of this community engagement. So they are far, far away in a little cocoon. So mainstream, yes, mainstream, community empowerment is really not there. So there are a number of examples that you can see on the screen. Community control over program management examples. You can see existing at lower levels and small value programs or institutions, school development societies, you will see some sort of community control with the parents. But no voice at the upper levels. You can see the examples 2, 3, and 4, which have been cited. So, conclusions. I have kind of broken up this because it's a very difficult question, Chantima. Are we on the right track? So, one question broken up. Are we on a track at all for community empowerment? In certain instances, as shown through the major poverty alleviation programs, attempts have been made and success seen in a fairly limited context. You can see little organizations, the Maradana, Samitiya having a lot of money, giving all that is very controlled. Are we on track? The extent, the degree and the extent. More affluent and educated have control over their destiny, but at individual and family level, very often not part of grassroots organizations. No control over macro issues, sovereignty given over by the people. We have given our rights to politicians without checks and balances. We don't ask, we don't critique, we don't recall. Low critical consciousness in anything to question. Even today's presentations might be taken for granted. So it's taken without questioning. And we are very impressed by big names. A lot of countries, they are not impressed by qualifications or who you are, what you are. You are taken for the individual that you are. Like Switzerland. The Swiss cantons, the tax system is decided by the villagers. How much tax should be charged. They are so independent and the cantons have different levels of taxation. But the people decide, right? So we are way behind on the track. Gender empowerment, very low. Are we on the right track? Your key question. Concerted efforts targeting the poor and the vulnerable are required. These programs have to be well organized and structured. There has to be a structured, regular program from the preschool parents association, from the school development society, from the hospital committee, from the farm organization. An empowerment mechanism has to be there. We do it now, then we forget. We come to the top and then we forget. Then we are treating people like gods and we have forgotten, right? So for those who are not poor, but average citizens, community consciousness, that you are part of a community, that you need to start asking the questions and at least people will follow and start getting empowered. That has to be there. We are not critical thinkers. We are not community conscious. So I don't think we are still, though we have had attempts and by some means, because we have a rich heritage and culture, we have done certain things to be fair. During emergencies, you see people kicking into action. But are we on the right track is a very difficult question. And I personally, looking at the evidence, again, as I said, very difficult to evaluate community empowerment. I don't think that we are on the right track of operations to get there. So thank you very much again for giving this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Vishaka, for your impressive presentation. Now we are moving to Symposium Lecture 3, which is about scaling up multi-sectoral nutrition by Ms. Dilka Piris. Let me give you a brief introduction about Ms. Dilka Piris. She's having Masters in Food and Nutrition from University of Peradeniya and BSc in Nutrition from Mayambu University of Sri Lanka. She has experience in working as a development practitioner, project or program designer in non-government organizations field for more than 18 years. Currently hold the position of Project Director of the Scaling Up Nutrition Civil Society Alliance of Sri Lanka and working with a wide network of NGOs and CSOs in the country. Further, she was the chairperson of the Scaling Up Nutrition Civil Society Alliance from 2014 to 2020. In this capacity, she has extended services and expertise to capacity building of CSOs, project development and management specifically, contributing to multi-sectoral approaches and collaborating with multi-sector stakeholders. She was the technical advisor for the health and nutrition sector of World Vision Lanka and led the implementation of integrated health and nutrition program. Ms. Dilka was a former council member of NSSL and also she has served as the joint secretary of the Nutrition Society for 2 consecutive terms. Dilka, the floor is over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the President and the Council of the Nutrition Society of Sri Lanka inviting me to do this lecture on scaling up multi-sectoral nutrition approaches. So, Visakha earlier presentation with the colorful pictures talked about the community engagement, and also Dr. Lakshmini Magaratna speak about the policy influence, what should happen, and also the multi-sector engagement. Our keynote speech is also about the multi-sector nutrition approaches. So it seems it is a very much demanding topic in the country at this moment. So I'll also start with giving a introduction. As you all know, I don't want to mention this here. Malnutrition is a problem that countries are struggling to overcome. Although it shows a trend, Global Nutrition Report 2020 say, but it is progressing too slow. So it is complex and multifaceted problem. And also it suggests successful elimination and prevention of malnutrition requires multifactorial, multi-sectoral, and multi-stakeholder responses. So I am going to talk about all these three, not only multi-sectorial approach, it has the multi-stakeholder and multi-factorial approach as well. So I will bring the Global Nutrition Report 2020 calls on governments, business, and the civil society to step up efforts to address malnutrition on all its forms to tackle injustices in food and health system. So it is the call by the Global Nutrition Report. So this is an extract from the Global Nutrition Report summary. So as I mentioned, and you know, today globally, 1 in 9 people affected with undernutrition and 1 in 3 people affected with overweight and obesity. So we have a huge issue there. So with that, we know that global country level disparities are there. Within countries, there are a lot of issues. And also not only countries, as Visakha also mentioned, yeah, in the community, in different communities, marginalized and vulnerable communities, the problem is serious. So we need to consider all these areas when we are doing multi-sectorial approaches and the collaborations. So poor diet intake is not the personal choice only, but also the access to food system and also the quality health and nutrition care services as also matters. So need to think about the food system strengthening and health system strengthening to the nutrition service delivery to the communities, the countries. So now is the time to link, to come up with sustainable food systems and also collaborate and commit to nutrition actions to improve the nutrition of the people. So it is the global call and our country is also in a need of that. So we all know, and Dr. Lakshmini Magaratna also mentioned about this, how we should act. So UNICEF conceptual framework on causes of malnutrition, you all know it's showing us how we should address the multifaceted problem. So there are areas we need to layers, causes, factors to address. So we know now we are in a pandemic situation, COVID-19. So nutrition issue is very much a big problem. So we need to address the immediate causes, providing adequate dietary intake, and also disease. We need to properly treat the diseases, curative care, as well as very much important while addressing the immediate causes and underlying causes as well. So we need to improve the enhanced food security, and also maternal child care practices, feeding practices, those are very much important. I am taking the example of undernutrition here. And also then healthy environment is very much important. So we need to strengthen the health services, nutrition service delivery, and also the other supporting factors like water sanitation facilities. So then we have to go beyond that as well, the basic causes of malnutrition, we need to address those things also. So political, we talked about the commitments in the keynote speech also, it's mentioned the commitment, political commitment, government buy, and also the education, economic improvement, enhancing household economy, and social cultural barriers changing also very much important. So these are simple definitions for these multiple factors, like each of these underlying causes in turn results from multiple factors. And also multi-sector approach, simple definition, multi-sector approach refers to deliberate collaboration among various sectors. So Dr. Margaret Ratner in her presentation shared us in the nutrition policy, how it's mentioned and how the various sectors play this role in the multiple sectors. And also multi-stakeholders, it is very much important. Always we think multi-sector approach means only the government sectors. No, it is not only the government sector. Multi-stakeholders are the various players, government, within government, there are ministries are there. And then if we take example, United Nations organizations, civil society, and also private sector, even academia should come as multi-stakeholders together. And engagement to address nutrition problems, taking forward the policy actions towards. So by engaging these multiple sectors, stakeholders can leverage knowledge, expertise, reach, coverage, and resources. So then it would help us to address these factorial effects of malnutrition. So what we should do, all of you know there are two complementary approaches to improve nutrition, nutrition-specific interventions, nutrition-sensitive interventions. So action on both nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive interventions is very much important to address the issue of nutrition. So briefly, I'm not going to explain a lot about these are known factors. So nutrition-specific interventions are to address the immediate determinants of malnutrition. If we take undernutrition, so feeding practices, maternal child care practices, promote breastfeeding, dietary supplementation, immunization, growth monitoring, nutrition in emergencies. Those are nutrition-specific factors we need to consider when scaling up multi-sectorial approaches. So we need to identify the correct interventions, and then nutrition-specific interventions can't go alone. So nutrition-sensitive interventions should support. So interventions programs that are addressing the underlying determinants of malnutrition called the nutrition-sensitive interventions. they can serve to, and they are the delivery platform for the nutrition specific interventions. So we need to have those multi-sectors on board to support the nutrition specific activities delivery. So examples, as Dr. Margaret Ratna correctly shared, that agriculture sector, food security, early childhood development, women's empowerment. Visakha talked about the gender. Women has to play a role and men has to play a role in family nutrition, which is not happening and understand by our people well in our societies. So those we need to consider. And water and sanitation, those are the nutrition sensitive things which are very much important to address the issue. So when we are addressing this scaling up multi-sectorial approach, these interventions we need to identify and scale them up. So what are the actions and how we should consider when implementing, what should be implementing multi-sector programs. So creating and enabling political environment and political commitment, strong in-country leadership should be there. Yeah, we have seen now the currently, we can't see that commitment as it was. And also a shared space. Multi-stakeholders should come together, where different sectors, groups should come together and align their activities and take joint responsibility to scaling up nutrition activities. It is, we talked about a lot about in steering groups, committees, while ago. Well, it is not that joint actions to be taken together to address these issues and align actions across sectors around high quality and well-costed country plans with an agreed result framework, and also the accountability system should be there, national to the district, local level as well to the ground level. It is not just lying there at the national level. And increasing resources for coherent, aligned approaches by various partners. The multi-sector plan should not be only to the government, but those plans should be multi-stakeholder plans. Then strong coordination and monitoring system at central level and also at the local level as well. There should be a coordinated monitoring mechanism led by higher government officials as different layers and sectors involved in this. It should not come under one particular ministry, specific ministry, because there are various stakeholders to coordinate and monitor. So then it should be at, in the keynote speech also this was mentioned, at top higher level. So establishing best practices for scaling up prone interventions, including the adaptation of effective laws and policies. There should be opportunity to share the evidences and to do researches and then come up with the interventions. So these discussions should go on this body. Important of an accountability mechanism as well. So then now you ask, so where are we now in the country? Actually, we have a nutrition policy developed, and there are other supporting policies, non-communicable disease policy, maternal child health policy, food security policy was what we were discussed recently. And we have a multi-sector action plan developed, 2013 we developed, and then it ended in 2016, and then again we developed one. It was their cabinet approved, and we went to the district level action plan development. There was a national nutrition coordination body, but now I don't think they are there still. They are not functioning well. So those things actually, as way forward actions, we all are nutrition people who are interested in nutrition, or we are working in nutrition field. So we need to consider taking forward. And also the first point, the creating environment, enabling political environment and commitment is very much important in a country like Sri Lanka. So again, I am bringing this government, business and civil society must step up the global nutrition call. So because I'm going to talk about multi-stakeholder involvement. So it is already said, planning long and short-term interventions aligned to policies. And by doing researches and planning, then working with the different stakeholders. So identify the best collaboration, work closely together. And also we have to think about the creating win-win situation as well, because our expectations are different. Different players, we are trying to come different players together. Our mandates are different, expectations are different. So how we come up with the win-win situation? It is not only owned by one stakeholder or one sector. So those things we need to discuss, and also truly invest on the success of these plans. And also we have to recognize that the scaling is an active process. We need to learn by doing, and also we have to reflect and then correct and change those interventions. Because for some sectors, it is a new subject area. They are interested in supporting nutrition. However, it is not their main prime business. So others have to help them. So technical capacity improvement is very much important. It's mentioned in the keynote speech as well. So proper guidelines, toolkits, checklists should be given to different stakeholders to collaborate. And then repeatedly, I am saying a strong multi-stakeholder coordination body to monitor, follow up of the implementation and scaling up of multi-sector action plans and approaches. So we can't forget challenges as well for scaling up multi-sector approaches. So what would be the challenges? Competing parallel systems, right? There are the community level, there are be number of groups formed by various people. So there be conflicts. So we need to consider those as well. And also some stakeholders, example, some ministries see nutrition as not a subsector, subordinate. It's not their main role. Example, like Ministry of Agriculture, see this, they have the food system, food production there. So it is not their part, nutrition sometimes they see. But we need to clearly identify what is the responsibility of that particular sector. And also, most of the time, nutrition has been called as a forgotten or hidden sector, right? Because it's often fall with health, Ministry of Health, or sometimes in some other countries, Ministry of Agriculture. So it's not coming out. So it is not a forgotten or hidden sector. It should come out, right? And also, lack of decision-making authority accompanied by limited capacity. As I mentioned, in current, we are experiencing, there should be a body who can support and supervise and monitor these multi-stakeholder approaches and collaboration and coordination. And also, it is very much important, the high-level political commitment country like Sri Lanka. So, and also the limited coordination capacity beyond the national level. Most of the time we plan at national level, and then we are not checking whether they are implemented really at the district and local level. So we need to engage with district levels as well, empower them, technically guide the district officials. Those things should be happen. And also local or community-based civil society organizations, as Visakha correctly mentioned, how their engagement and involvement, and also the private sector. So we have to go and check whether in our policies, in our action plans, whether the private sector collaboration is mentioned there. And also lack of capacity to implement, if they are not in proper capacity to implement these, the excellent policies and action plans will be just aside, fall apart, the level of implementation, it will not come out properly. So way forward, as the multi-sectorial models, it is very much, or we today, or from the beginning up to now, we discussed a lot about this word. So it is very much important scalability and also sustainability of this multi-sectorial action plans and approaches and multi-stakeholder approaches. And also the outcome should be, this is mentioned in the Global Nutrition Report as well, strengthen coordination and alignment, financing, accountability. And also action on equity to end malnutrition should be there. As Sri Lanka, we are facing a triple burden of malnutrition, stagnant situation of undernutrition, emerging not emerging, actually rising of non-communicable diseases and a burden of micronutrient diseases such as anemia. It is very much important to scale up multi-sector approaches, multi-stakeholder engagement to address the multifaceted issues. So as scaling up Nutrition People's Forum, call for action during this COVID-19 period, COVID-19 and nutrition, it is very much important. So when you are doing response and recovery activities for address nutrition in the COVID situation, so always we should integrate nutrition in response and recovery plans and support the capacity of health system to deliver and prioritize the need of the most vulnerable and also sustain the functioning of local food system. So by doing that, we have to protect the poor and the most vulnerable. Hunger and malnutrition will be necessary for COVID-19 response efforts to succeed, because we know we have experienced last year and now this year also how people are suffering because of this COVID-19 situation. So nutrition is so much affected. And also essential preventive and curative nutrition interventions must continue, should not stop. We have to measure the children in some, we have to take steps to do it properly. Even short-term disruptions could have irreversible effects on child survival, health and development. And also efforts to preserve and promote proper nutrition, including breastfeeding, must be a part of COVID-19 prevention strategies. So with that alone, we can do so little, but with multi-sector and multi-stakeholder involvement together, we can do so much to address this complex issue of nutrition. Thank you so much.
Possible ways of implementing a multi-sectoral approach to improve nutrition with your own experience. Now we are moving into panel discussion. Before moving into panel discussion, we have a question for our virtual participant based on the symposium 2. The question is, according to the Global Nutrition Report 2020, what percentage of population is either overweight or obese? Please answer to this question with your names and phone number in Q&A section of the link. There are several questions for our panelists, but with the time constraint, actually, I'm going to select 2 more questions for our panel. For Dr. Lakmini, I think she's still with us. She's not there?
Yeah, I am available.
Okay,
Yeah.
Doctor. There is a question from Mr. Rohit. He's asking, Sri Lanka having vast variety of natural foods, but we are poor use of them. How is the policy improving above condition? Is it clear to you? Sri Lanka having vast variety of natural foods, but we are poor use of them. How this policy improving above condition?
Thank you for the question. I think national nutrition policy that been drafted has been addressing, and also very recently we have launched our new food-based dietary guidelines. And the food-based dietary guidelines emphasize on having food, diverse food, using local food. that is, I think, a traditional food that I think the questioner is asking Mr. Rohita. That must be considered in traditional food, no?
Yeah.
So
It's
the
a
food-based dietary guideline launch, and it will be implemented during this year with COVID-19 situation. We find it will be difficulty, but definitely it's on dissemination. So I think drafted national nutrition policy and this new food-based dietary guideline we launched would address that problem issue.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lakmini. There's one other question for Vishaka that it's from Mr. Wilford. Those are open for women in politics. Why they are not coming forward? Even the presently available women in politics, do you think they are truly representing the underprivileged women, specifically farmer women? The question is that even the presently available women in politics, do you think they are truly representing underprivileged women in Sri Lanka? Are they representing?
Very easy answer. In politics, we have never represented underprivileged women. So the reason being, I think the structures at local level, the environment for women to enter politics from the grassroots, there are many good women at grassroots, but the violence, the money that is thrown into political campaigns, all that leave the women out, number one. And there is no political literacy and education at school level, which addresses both genders. I'm not saying only the women, but the males also. So it's a long story, and that is why we don't really have Sri Lankan and South Asian politics for women has been a privileged politics for women. It's always those who are in the limelight. Kanduru Chanda, their fathers have been leaders or mothers, and that's how they emerge.
Thank you, Vishaka. I think you answered very well for this question. Yeah, there's one other question. It's basically, I think it's for Vishaka. He haven't mentioned about to whom it's direct. What is the status of urban agriculture in Sri Lanka? And can you please tell us about the opportunities for women in the urban agriculture?
Well, again, another good question. I think the Sitamu, what I mentioned earlier, Sitamu Women's Agriculture or Farmer Societies is for everyone. There are Sitamus even in the urban areas. So the best thing is to go and get the details of how to join from your local Govijana Kendra, Agrarian Service Center. Even Colombo has several. Go and ask how you can get the membership. And then there are actually many facilities that are given through the Sitamus. And I must add that the best home garden was selected 3 years ago in my area, Killapan Avenue, on a rooftop. So, you know, a woman's home garden.
Thank you, Vishaka. With answering all 3 questions, I am going to round up this panel discussion for Symposium 2. Thank you, Dr. Lakmini, joining with us virtually, and Vishaka and Dilka for coming here and presenting here to give you that marvelous presentations. I think we can conclude the Symposium 2 now.